Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Crash Zoom. I'm Sammie Purcell, Associate Editor with Rough Draft Atlanta, and I'm here, as always, with indie filmmaker Aaron Strand. How you doing this Memorial Day weekend, Aaron?
Oh, I am doing so good, Sammie. Indie filmmaker, but right now my life is mostly about being a dad because
Yay.
Memorial Day weekend comes with school being closed for a week. So trying to navigate that. Yeah, they close it all week because we get it's technically the end of the normal semester.
Yeah, I was about to say, I guess
like
most kids would be home
camps.
for the summer. Yeah.
Oh, God. I'm dying. I'm dying. What do I do with this kid for a week? It's not even a week. It's 9 days from weekend to weekend.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to be going up to Athens tomorrow. We're going to get a little grandma time in there right now.
Nice.
Shub has taken her out on a scooter. So we're going to try to squeeze this podcast in before the 3-year-old tornado comes back to my house. And I'm not sure I'll be able to record through that.
All right, we'll try to move through these fast then. We'll leave the chit chat to the wayside for the day.
So much to get through this week.
I know.
It's a poppin' week. A poppin' week here. So
week.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Let's get into it. So if you've never listened to Crash Zoom before, what Aaron and I do here is we talk about what's going on in the film industry on a big picture level, and then we discuss why that matters to the independent or smaller artist. And if you listen today and you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also watch us on YouTube at Crash Zoom Podcast. And be sure to rate and review too. That really helps us out. But before we dive into the news this week, we always start this podcast off with one question, which is, what have you been watching lately, Aaron?
This week, I've been watching a lot of NBA, but that's old hat. I've talked about that enough on this show. Except for this, I do have a hot take about that. David Zaslav has cursed the New York Knicks. Now, I know the Knicks won last night in Indiana. But have you seen the TNT broadcast where they do Celebrity Row and it's always they show Timothée Chalamet and Ben Stiller?
Spike.
And then they always feature David Zaslav. And in game 1, he forced Larry David to sit with him. In game 2, he forced John McEnroe to sit with him. And it always is so weird. Like, one of these things is not like the other because it's Timothée Chalamet, Ben Stiller, Larry David, and David Zaslav. Like, Zaz, you just won a little piece of my heart. And then this shameless plug, which of course TNT is a WBD, network, to force himself on the broadcast as part of this whole PR rebranding strategy. It is so transparent and cringy. And what do you know? The Knicks blow the first 2 games at home. Didn't get a game until they went to Indiana. I blame Zaz.
Zaz, stay home. Stay home. Don't go to the games.
Talk on the phone. Do what you're good at. Run your mouth to a bunch of other septuagenarian white men and just get the fuck away from the Knicks. Please. We're trying to do something special here. Okay. Now, as I was saying, what I've really been watching is a wonderful documentary from a young filmmaker. And I'd heard about it when it came out back in 2021. Had just never gotten around to watching it. The filmmaker's name is Haley Garrigus, and the film is called You Can't Kill Meme. And it's basically about mimetic magic, like, woo-woo, crazy magic. But this guy wrote a book about mimetic magic, about how memes can be used to cast magic spells in 2006. And this book was seized upon by the far right in 2010 and basically influenced their use of memes in the buildup to the 2016 election. And so she tracks this crazy story threading together sort of chaos, magic, weird internet magicians, the far right, she tracked down the guy who actually wrote the original book, who had taken it out of circulation because of the way it was being used. Totally wackadoo bonkers stories, but she got some incredible interviews with some true grade A American weirdos. And it tells a really, really important history of 2016, a sort of esoteric history of 2016 in the modern world. So I really loved it. It was released by Utopia back in 2021, 2022. Haley as a filmmaker is just super cool, and love the movie. Please check it out. You can rent it, on Prime and Apple TV.
Nice. All right, I'm gonna run through mine kind of quickly, just because I've been watching a lot of TV lately. So just
Ooh.
super quickly, I watched Bulworth, Warren Beatty's Bulworth for the first time.
Oh,
Fascinating movie if you
okay.
ever have
I
the
haven't seen
chance to
that
watch
one.
it. It stars Warren Beatty as a kind of disillusioned liberal politician, kind of like Clinton era liberal, who decides he's kind of over and done with it and takes a hit out on his own life after upping his life insurance so his family's like paid out. And then because of that, he's sort of like, well, I can do whatever I want, and starts like at a in front of a black congregation, he sort of like goes off and basically tells them that the Democratic Party doesn't care about any of you, and kind of just like tells the truth. And that actually kind of gains him a little bit of cred with everyone because he's, telling the truth. So he decides that he doesn't want to die. And then there's a whole kind of like problem with like getting in touch with the hitman. And also he raps a lot.
What?
Yes.
Wait, is this a TV? You said you've been watching a lot of TV. This isn't
no,
a TV
no
show.
movie.
This is a film,
I've been
right?
watching a lot. It's a film. Yes, I've been watching a lot of movies like this weekend. Just like watching a lot of. Maybe I meant TV in the
Oh,
sense that it's a physical TV, but watching a lot of movies on TV. And this was a really fascinating one. It's not perfect. It's it's a lot, but it was really funny, and the political critique is pretty funny, I think.
that
But
sounds
so
awesome.
it was a pretty good one. It was a lot of fun. I also watched The Innocents, Jack Clayton's 1961 The Innocents for the first time, starring Deborah
Oh
Kerr, which
yeah, of
I
course.
loved, was
Deborah
awesome.
Kerr, fabulous.
And then she's the best. And then watched, I'd seen this before, but rewatched it recently. John Frankenheimer's Seconds, starring Rock Hudson.
Oh,
So it's, yeah, just
yes.
like absolute
Oh,
blast. Love that film. So
yeah.
yeah, I've just been kind of rolling in the oldies, kind of in every sense of the
Hell
word
yeah.
for the
Oh,
past weekend. Yeah,
seconds hits so hard, and
it's
and
so
time
good.
has been so kind to that movie. It just gets better
Right.
and better and better.
It's really good. I like Rock Hudson a lot, and I love that performance. So definitely a fan. Check it out if you haven't seen it. It's a good one.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I know we have a very full rundown, but I
We
do feel
do.
like we have to acknowledge right off the top, Jafar
Yes.
Panahi got the Palme d'Or. It was
Yeah,
just an accident. Crazy.
I know. And then kind of jumping off that. Well, that's like crazy exciting for him, considering all he's been through in and out of prison. I guess in and out of like political prisoner for the past like I don't know how many decades. But also Neon bought that film, and that's like their sixth Palm buy in a row.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Did you
I
see they
mean,
posted the Jordan meme, the photo of Jordan with the
yeah,
6 rings on his hand?
I
Dude,
did.
so amazing. So
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Neon crushing it as always. And then they also get the Grand Prix with
Hmm.
sentimental value as well. I mean, they just were cleaning up left and right
Right.
as
I
usual.
mean, as usual, I'm so excited to see all of those movies too. I'm very excited. I feel like people were a little kind of, I don't know why. This year's like can reaction felt a little muted to me maybe, but I'm excited about a lot of these films coming out.
Yes, Cannes did feel a little muted. I feel like the publicists were like so focused on standing ovation counts, and there was and then there was like a real time blowback to the standing ovation minute counts, which are
Mhm.
so transparent and bullshit at this point, and everybody knows
Right.
it. And so people didn't really know how to pivot like away from that as a narrative, and it really dampened the whole broader sort of can like buzz. And it
Mhm.
just really, you're right. It did feel a little underwhelming this year.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm still excited to see a bunch of those. So maybe Cannes was muted, but the box office this weekend was not muted. So I put this in our rundown last week, and it was basically the Wrap and a bunch of other publications. It wasn't just them. We're predicting that this would be a record breaking box office Memorial Day weekend. And it was. So we had Lilo and Stitch, which I believe collected about $145 million dollars in its opening weekend. And that'll be an estimated 183 million through Monday. So we're not at the end of Monday yet. So we'll see where that leads us. And then we've also got Mission Impossible, Final Reckoning, which earned a series best $63 million dollars over the weekend with an estimated 77 million through Monday's holiday. So that beats Fallout, which is my favorite of the installments. Final Reckoning, little mixed on, but I'm happy that it's making money. And then, of course, you've got holdovers like Sinners, Thunderbolts, Final Destination, Bloodlines is doing really well. So it's like a healthy box office weekend, you know, lots to choose from. This is what happens when you have like effective counter programming. Like everyone has something to see at the movies. So super exciting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and this also puts 2025 has crossed the $3 billion global box office mark for this day. We're recording on May 26th. For this day, May 26th, which is beating last year by a considerable amount. And should, depending on how much they make today, might actually beat 2023, which was the record pacing year from the last 6 years. That is like the sort of the mark to beat. So they're certainly challenging it.
Yeah, and I mean last year was like I think the worst showing in a couple of decades for Memorial. It was that was Furiosa, which I thought was pretty good, but did not do well.
No.
And then Garfield, I think, was the children's programming that year. Sorry, Chris Pratt. But you
know, this does have some broader implications. Basically, that for as far as the Lilo and Stitch premiere, I mean, the Lilo and Stitch is really sort of kind of capturing the weekend. Some people are tracking that it's on pace to do $1 billion global, which means that not only are people going to be looking of how to monetize millennial nostalgia even harder, this hits the perfect nostalgia window of 20 to 25 years, but that we thought that maybe Snow White was the death knell for Disney live-action remakes. We heard that other Disney live-action remakes were getting paused based on the failure of that movie. But with Lilo and Stitch's success, rest assured, Bob Iger is going to keep hitting the go button, keep giving that green light to the Disney live-action remakes, and frankly, we are all worse for it.
Right. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a later rundown, which will be kind of interesting, I think. But anyway, great box office weekend. It's exciting. I had friends go see Mission Impossible Fallout today. Great. Or not Fallout.
Nice.
Final Reckoning. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Fallout on the brain.
Fallout on the plane. on the plane. We're moving through it. All right. Let's get into our kind of first big, dare I say it, honker of an article for this week's episode.
Wow. It's a honker. I got to get a sound effect for this.
I think we should
Sammie
make t-shirts.
Purcell honker, yes.
So this article is called Cartoon Network's Last Gasp. It's from Bloomberg. It was written by Felix Gillette. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this first kind of came across my radar because you sent over an Instagram reel from @KylaScan, basically talking about this article and how it kind of chronicles the downfall of Cartoon Network. So if you read the article, it's really good. It's really in-depth. It gives a lot of great quote, and it essentially follows Cartoon Network sort of through its initial years, kind of growing up within sort of the animation landscape. There's a really great quote in here where it kind of defines Disney as the animation studio, sort of as the kid at the front of the class with his hand raised, and then Nickelodeon's sort of in the middle, kind of class clown making jokes, and then Cartoon Network's like the dirtbag kid at the back, you know, spitballing everyone, which I thought was a pretty apt comparison. But sort of kind of tracks their, I mean, honestly, like just dominance sort of in the medium of animation through sort of their downfall. So that kind of, I would say, maybe not like absolutely began, but was really kind of struck hard with the Discovery Warner Brothers merger. David Zaslav didn't really care about animation and obviously made a ton of cuts at that time. And Cartoon Network and Adult Swim sort of took the brunt of that. And yeah, so I just wanted to kind of, before we kind of dive into the meat of this, I'd be curious to know like what so you're a little bit older than me. I'd be curious to know what your like relationship to Cartoon Network was like as a kid. Like were you, because kind of reading this article, I know for me, I was like, wow, I have a relationship to every single one of these shows mentioned. Like I watched all of these and more, like without even really realizing it. Like I wouldn't say, if you asked me, I wouldn't say I was a huge Cartoon Network kid, but reading this, I was like, oh yeah, I've seen every single one of these. I can cite specific episodes, like, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, I remember the age range when I sort of graduated from Nickelodeon to Cartoon Network because
Yeah.
I was never a Disney kid. I've always hated Disney, particularly like Disney television. I watched the movies
Sure.
as like the
I
classic
would
Disney
say
films as a little
Disney,
kid.
like their kind of bread and butter on TV was more live action than it was cartoons,
Yeah,
I'd say.
for
Yeah.
sure. But it was never my thing. And I remember gravitating to the Nickelodeon shows early on, Rugrats, Rocko's Modern Life,
Mm-hmm.
of course, stuff like that. But around 8 or 9, yeah, started switching over to Cartoon Network. Really, I think it was like a lot of kids, like a lot of boys my age, the Toonami anime stuff that they were
Yeah.
importing was the big draw after school, and like all of my friends watched Gundam Wing and Dragon Ball Z, and that kind of got me started on Cartoon Network. And then as I grew older, I mean, it was like I grew with the network, where uh, I think I drifted away sort of for like I never really watched Dexter's Laboratory or Powerpuff Girls. That wasn't
Ooh.
really my jam. But by
Yeah.
the time I started smoking pot when I was like 15 years old, that was like right as the time when Adult Swim was starting to get like really weird and like
Mm-hmm.
start and putting out more stuff. And I started to watch Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Yeah.
And that like I mean that for a 15-year-old stoner, that is like chef's kiss.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely triggered the old nostalgia, and it was just kind of shocking to see some of the numbers behind this. I mean, in the 2010s, which is a little after my time, but I guess is peak kind of Cartoon Network Adult Swim.
Mm-hmm.
The two-headed monster of Cartoon Network Adult Swim was regularly generating $1 billion in annual sales with a $500 million profit margin. That
Yeah.
is
Wild.
staggering numbers. Staggering numbers. I mean, just what a joy the cable bundle was. Yeah. What about you? You said you also had your nostalgia triggered. What was your Cartoon Network faves?
Oh yeah. Well, you know, Dexter's Laboratory, what's it called? What'd you say? Powerpuff Girls. Those were like totally in my wheelhouse. I was a huge fan of Totally Spies, which I don't know if you remember that. It was like kind of anime
No.
influenced. It was about like three teenage girls who were undercover spies. It was basically like Charlie's Angels for teenagers. Like,
Cool.
it was really, really cool. I was a big fan of that. I feel like all the guys in my life were really big into Ed, Edd n Eddy. So I caught a bunch
Oh,
of
Ed,
Ed,
Ed
Edd
and
n Eddy.
Eddie. Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, that was
And
hilarious.
I was the perfect age to like obsessively watch and be frightened by Courage the Cowardly Dog. I feel like that is like the big one that I really remember. And I feel like all
Oh,
of my friends have
yeah.
like very specific instances of being really scarred by that show at a young age.
Really? Holy
Yeah,
shit.
it's a pretty frightening show. Like it's really weird and it kind of like speaks to that like dirt bag quality. Like it's about this
Mm.
little purple spotted dog. He lives with like an elderly couple and he just like goes through nightmarish shit every episode. It's quite scary.
What's so cool about, even as we take this trip down memory lane, is that everything we are referencing is an original idea,
Yeah,
is an
I know.
original a story with original characters created by an original an original author. And so one of the
Mhm.
great things that this article does is it because of course as a kid you're not thinking about that, you're taking it all for granted, you know.
Yeah.
And so to realize that it was like, wow, not only did they have this institution operating within the cable bundle creating tremendous revenue streams, but that they were doing this incredible job of taking in-house interns, teaching them the ropes of animation, encouraging them to pitch projects, pitch ideas, pitch new things, and then empowering them to do so. So they had this internal pipeline of talent, that of people that would work on other shows and then pitch their own shows. And the thing just kept growing and growing in this incredibly organic way. And to hear people sort of wax poetical about the good old days at the Cartoon Network studios in Burbank or here at Adult Swim in Atlanta, was pretty shocking to think that, that all of this creativity was made possible. I had an idea, or it brought a question to the forefront of my mind, and I was curious if you had any thoughts here. Do you think the glory days of Cartoon Network and Adult Swim, do you think that is a story about creative freedom, or do you think it's a story about how the structural integrity of the cable bundle had a byproduct of creative freedom? Do you think it's like a systems story or like a creativity story?
I think maybe it's like hard to kind of disentangle the two in a sense. Like, in this article, they talk about kind of early on, like 2000s days, like you still have kind of like, I guess, corporate overlords, for lack of a better term, to report to, right? And they'll talk about how they were like pitched, like, can you make a show based on this toy? Can you make a show based on this toy? And they had like more, perhaps in the way that the cable system worked, they had more room to say, well, no. And there was just like more creative freedom maybe represented like within that system at that time. Because they kind of talk about, and the Instagram reel that you sent me, I thought at Kyla Scan did a very good job sort of articulating this. Like, it disappeared. The reason Cartoon Network kind of disappeared is because the system that now exists is based on like low cost, high reward, right? So like there's another kind of, and this paragraph in this article way towards the end kind of put this into real perspective for me. So last fall, Cartoon Network began airing Barney's World, which is about Barney, the big purple dinosaur. And they talked to a former Cartoon Network exec who's like, this is exactly the kind of thing that we would have laughed at like 20 years ago. You know what I mean? But now that's just the world that we live in. And so I think it's really hard to sort of disentangle the two from each other. But I do think it seems, at least from this article, back in those days, they just had like a ton of creative freedom, a ton of room to say no to something that they didn't want to do or didn't see like the creativity in, which doesn't really exist anymore.
It's also certainly easier to be a lot more creative when you're really only competing against two other entities. You're
That's
competing
true.
against Disney and you're competing against Nickelodeon. Like you know, and within that very constrained environment, everyone was able to find their role, as demonstrated by this metaphor of, who's who in the classroom.
Right.
And that all works very well. When you're in a digital distribution network where anybody can make anything upload it to the internet, and you can get outflanked, and there was always there, especially if you're trying to circle your brand identity around dirtbag kid in the back of the class hawking spitballs, like you've now got 100 million dirtbags hawking spitballs on YouTube, spitting at you every single day. And so it's way harder to just sort of like get that brand identity within a non-contained system.
Yeah. And maybe, I mean, it's like they've become like the loser parents now, like I guess the cool kid at some point always has to become like the not cool kid on the block. Like we'll talk about this kind of next, I guess. Wow. Like, like honestly, but like if you think about like A24 and MUBI, which like spoiler, that's coming, like this always happens, right? Like you kind of become the dinosaur.
Yeah. You live long enough
through no fault
to become,
of your own.
You live long enough to become the villain. That's true.
Yeah.
But also like this is also like a story that has broader implications. I couldn't also help but think that like in a world where people have money and time and they're not so stressed about it, or like in just more prosperous economic conditions, and where time is not under such attack from sort of all these disruptors in the space, people spend their money and time on fun, original shit. That is like a core human thing to do. And one could argue that like all of our distractions are technically like happening because people are making fun, original shit on social media. But when you don't, when your time is compressed and at a limit, and the finances, the liquidity in the sort of middle class marketplace is constrained, certainly compared to the 90s and the early 2000s, then people hyper focus on, they retreat into nostalgia and known quantities, and they're less excited by risk taking. And that applies to the consumer who's clicking on the tiles on their smart TV, on their Max app, as well as the executives trying to cater to that consumer. It's just very frustrating because I do think that this has sort of a broader implication that like we just have less money and less time right now. So established studios are less able to create fun, inventive, new ideas.
Right. And I mean, we were just talking about Lilo and Stitch, and it's like the exact same thing, right? Like I love Lilo and Stitch. Again, I'm like the exact perfect age to have like loved that movie and grown up with it. And it is like, I think what's like really slowly changing now is like, if I like look at my parents, like, or my parents or my siblings, like we all had different kind of cultural touch points. And now what's different is like my nephews who are 4 or turning 4 in like a couple weeks, their cultural touch points are like going to be the same. because they're probably going to go see this like Lilo and Stitch movie, but are they going to have like, I don't know, new big sort of like things to tack onto? And I guess that's been happening since Star Wars, but it's just interesting that we all have like similar touch points regardless of age.
Well, yeah, the world has flattened, yes, as
Yeah.
globalization has interconnected the world, but in a weird way, the progress of culture has flattened as well.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, if you compare it to like the way someone dressed from 1965 to 1975, it's like they're from two different planets and like two totally different backwards worlds. And now the progress of that culture has slowed down so much. The pressure that we all feel has flattened everything out to the point where we're going to discuss a little later Matt Belloni's youth survey and what the youths are thinking, or at least what certain youths are thinking about
what
film
some
and television.
Los Angeles youths are thinking.
Yeah, what some very film literate Los Angeles youths are thinking about film and television. But when asked like, what are your favorite celebrities, one of them mentions Conan O'Brien, and he's like, Conan O'Brien is 62 years old, and they're like, yeah, I'm just really rooting for him, and it's like, what? What? You're rooting for Conan?
Cool with the kids. I actually, that is so funny. That brings up on one of my buses at Sundance, because Conan was at Sundance. He was like walking around, he is on the streets. I didn't see him, but the like very obviously teenagers next to me did, and they were so excited. And I was like, Conan is like pull with the children.
Dude, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Conan's amazing. This is not an anti-Conan
no.
statement.
I love Conan.
It's just shocking that the way like they have the same reaction that I had to Conan 20 years ago. I don't think that 35-year-olds would have like that generational gap was happening to Johnny Carson 30 years ago, right? Look, this also like it ultimately all this comes down to money. There was a Daily's article, or the Daily's newsletter came out today, and it was talking about YouTube is targeting Emmys wins to bring prestige so that they can demand higher advertising dollars. But there was an interesting little tidbit in there, which is that YouTube's CPMs, or basically what advertisers pay per 1,000 views, is hovering around $15 per 1,000 views. Whereas traditional TV networks and major streamers are still commanding $32 to $42 for those same eyeballs, for the same 1,000 eyeballs. So what that means is that YouTubers are earning like about $4 per 1,000 views using YouTube's AdSense payment model through their partner program. And the artist is making basically like $4,000 per million views as on their individual YouTube channel. This is like if they're working solo. Compare that to in 2014 at peak Adult Swim, they're making $500 million in profit, and they're averaging 1.3 million viewers in prime time. So like, that there's something about those. I know that like shouting out numbers is like terrible radio, but the fact that 1 million viewers translated to $500 million in profit in 2014, that ultimately, that pie got cut up, but it certainly trickled down to the creative class there. And now in the sort of artist empowerment, you can just be your own boss era, that same number of views is equaling $4,000.
Right.
It's infuriating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild stuff. And, speaking of numbers, moving on to our next, moving away from the downfall, as you said earlier, to the uprise of a company. We're going to talk a little bit about MUBI, which if you listen to any podcast or any movie podcast, really, I feel like everyone's advertising MUBI. That's not like a call out for MUBI to advertise with us or anything, but let's get into this.
But it'd be cool if they did. Like, yeah.
It'd be cool. Sure, be cool.
Let's kiss their ass for the next 25 minutes and see what happens.
I don't have to try, but this is an interesting kind of variety article. So, Elsa Keslasi, I hope again that I'm pronouncing her last name right, wrote this for Variety, and so it's just about sort of the rise of MUBI and F.A. Kakkarao. Is that how you say his name? You might know better than me.
I believe so.
F.A. Kakkarao. So basically, he's the founder of MUBI, and it's just sort of tracking MUBI's rise from 2006 when he couldn't find In the Mood for Love, which, like, relatable. He got mad about it. And he started a site in 2007. It was called the Auteurs platform, I believe, and then renamed MUBI as we know it in 2010. And, I feel like MUBI really popped off. Like, obviously, they've been around for a long time. And I was hearing about them before this. I remember kind of the first time I think was around Decision to Leave, which is mentioned in this article, and a big kind of movie that they were able to really push. But I think they really popped off with The Substance last year. So they were able to swoop up The Substance when Universal dropped it, give it a big movie theater release, and made it really profitable, right? And it's interested in doing that with more movies now. So we talked about Cannes a little bit earlier. MUBI and Neon are like the only buyers out of Cannes. And so this guy, Cat Grell, is like really, really aggressively sort of going after buying these movies. They have now gotten into the business of fully producing movies. So Kelly Reichardt's Mastermind, I believe, is the first movie that they have like front to back kind of been behind. It's their movie. And, we talked about this a little bit over the weekend when you kind of mentioned this article to me for the first time. And it is like a very glowing, oh, MUBI, like this guy's like trying to save like cinema, basically. But at the same time, I'm cognizant of that. And I do like it when guys like this with like this kind of brain and money seem genuinely interested in cinema. So that's what I kind of have to say to start us off. But
this is
it's glowing.
This is pure propaganda. This is dripping propaganda. Okay, like they give him like the most incredible heroic origin story. First of all, because he's like for the meeting of cinema and business, right? So here is a guy who got a full scholarship to MIT. He was a math champion for his home country of Turkey. Then he goes to Stanford MBA. Then he goes and works for Goldman Sachs, and that's kind of like a small detail in the articles because they don't want to scare away the cinephiles. They're like, and then he was an investment banker for a little bit. But then on a trip to Tokyo in 2006, on New Year's Eve, he couldn't find a copy of Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love. And on the flight home, he began writing his business plan for what would eventually become MUBI. My first question is, why was he looking for In the Mood for Love on New Year's Eve? Either that was the saddest New Year's Eve
he was sad,
of
honestly.
all time. He had to be so
he definitely
lonely.
Just got broken up with.
Or either that or he met a girl and he was doing that horrible he was film broing her. He was trying to film bro this girl. He was like, have you seen In the Mood for Love? Oh, it's going to change your life. And then he's running around Tokyo trying to find In the Mood for Love. Oh, you don't have In the Mood for Love?
I can't be mad about it though, because I would react the same way, I'd be like, that's crazy that you don't have that.
So relatable. But bro, there's gotta be better things to do with your life on New Year's Eve in 2006 in Tokyo than try to find really In the Mood for Love. Yeah. I hope he was crying in his beer, looking for In the Mood for Love. But all that to say is I'm glad he had the saddest New Year's Eve ever. Because this is really incredible. Yes, MUBI has had this incredible come up, but really in the last 2-3 years, it has just popped off. So they made $83 million with The Substance. Demi Moore had an incredible press tour that they pushed, almost got her an Oscar, didn't quite get it done, but still it showed what they could do. They have now received a $100 million investment from one of the most forward-thinking VC firms in the world, Sequoia Capital, which values the company at $1 billion. They're still private. They're still a private company, but they are getting a $1 billion valuation that has allowed them to go out and do all these things. They have 400 employees in over 15 markets. They are building cinemas, their own cinemas in over 11 cities around the world. That is quite incredible. And they have just gone on a Cannes buying spree. They have bought Die My Love, Lynn Ramsey's new movie. I believe they are going to gear up for a Jennifer Lawrence Oscar campaign hard for that film.
Let's go, baby.
They have the international rights to Sentimental Value. We talked about Neon's got Sentimental Value on lock for US, but MUBI owns the international rights and will be doing the international release for Joachim Trier's follow-up to Worst Person in the World. They picked up maybe the buzziest film of the festival, The Sound of Falling. And then you mentioned The Mastermind, Kelly Reichardt's new movie. What's so interesting about that is that Kelly Reichardt has been with A24 for like her last 3 films.
Right.
So they scooped Kelly Reichardt away from A24 and got and have the GOAT,
the GOAT. She is.
They got the GOAT excited to come over to MUBI and work with them. And they didn't stop there. They picked up The Secret Agent, Alpha. It was just an accident. On their international rights, and Surat. They purchased Lurker out of Sundance this year. They financed La Grazia, Paolo Sorrentino's new film. They are gearing up for this sort of next phase of their development where they are a major player in the indie space. It is quite incredible.
Yeah, and it's so interesting the way the article kind of positions FA is so interesting to me. Like when we talk about someone like David Zaslav, we're like, doesn't seem to be like filmmaker friendly, but wants to be filmmaker friendly, I believe was how the profile kind of pitched him when we did that a couple weeks ago. And there's this really great quote where Cackerel is sort of talking about walking to the Oscars, and he goes, "I saw every great filmmaker, every Best Picture nominee, Edward Berger, Brady Corbet, Sean Baker, Denis Villeneuve. I consider them friends." For this, he is like really trying to position himself as that guy. For the last 20 years, we've been championing their films. They're all on MUBI. At this point, we're like the restaurant that the chefs go to. And I was like, ooh. So, he's really like, he is trying to take that mantle that I feel like Zaz is sort of reaching for and doing it. Like if that's, like at least artistically, I should say.
Yeah. Well, I think Zaz is probably the wrong comparison point here to sort of really
in terms of like I want
these
wants to appear artist friendly, I should say.
He does. I mean, the article also mentions the sort of the elephant in the room, which is that MUBI is essentially trying to fill the void that Miramax left, and with Harvey's downfall. And so I would say the real comparison point is like he is trying to be a Harvey Weinstein, a sort of a non-creepy, non-domineering, non-abusive Harvey Weinstein for the new millennium.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's totally fair. And like, again, we talked about this, during the last segment, but it's sort of like there's a quote in here. MUBI's cool kid swagger is reminiscent of when A24 launched more than a decade ago, right? So like, again, there's always some sort of new guy swooping in, taking up the mantle.
But it's interesting because A24 as a brand, it was always a logo, not a face. There wasn't like, oh, we worship at the feet of so and so.
This guy,
of the geniuses behind A24, which is like a couple of guys. But there was not a sort of face forward, and so it's very interesting that at this pivot point for MUBI, we come out with this variety cover story, this glowing personal portrait, and they go into like it's all these weird details about him making tea and having cookies before the tea, and his
beautiful Notting Hill home.
Yes, his posh London flat, and like they really do go the whole 9 yards to try to make it. You so wish you were invited to his London house and you had tea. With
I'm available.
We are all very available. But it's interesting to see him stepping out as face forward. Clearly, he feels like ready to sort of handle that mantle. I'm curious though, because there's no sort of mention, sort of like what artistic oversight MUBI is having, and so they brand themselves as very artistic forward. The thing about Harvey that no one wants to talk about, because nobody wants to say anything good about this, monster that, dominated this corner of the industry. But, the Weinstein brothers did have a very active role that, while we deride when it comes to cutting some of their foreign acquisitions and the way that they would butcher some foreign films, did really shape and hone art house cinema for a new audience within the United States. And they played a very active role in that. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem like MUBI and F.A. Cackerel is really doing that with their movies currently.
Yeah, I don't know. Like it's very hush-hush otherwise. And like, it's interesting. I think A24, and like, correct me if you've heard other stuff, but I feel like they're kind of known for at least like being able to like give a lot of artistic freedom to filmmakers. But at the same time, I can always tell it's an A24 movie, if that makes sense. Like, there's definitely like a house sort of style.
Totally.
If that, like, and I don't know if MUBI, like, kind of looking through their movies, and obviously, like, The Mastermind is sort of the first one they've done like front to back. So I think that'll be interesting to see and to compare that to like movies they do that with moving forward. But like the sort of library where it's like The Substance and Decision to Leave and The Girl with the Needle are all very different. Like those are very different movies. So it is interesting that they don't really seem to have developed that kind of thing yet.
It does make me nervous, though, because he mentioned a possibility, like the possibility of going public in the near future as an access to more liquidity. But with that public, that, you know, once you go public, you are beholden to shareholders. All of a sudden, you are having to deliver quarterly profit earnings on a level that you just don't have to deal with when you're private. And that's where the sort of like, because let's face it, A24 in 2016 was producing stuff like Moonlight and like these very diverse movies. They were buying really cool films like Krisha off of the Sundance market or whatever. And you're right, they have now turned themselves into the Netflix of art house film, and they've kind of essentially rebranded into sort of a B horror studio. I mean, yes, they do it in an elevated way, but like, come on.
Yeah, I do think the horror movies kind of get the most buzz, but like looking at their sort of, I mean, Bring Her Back is coming out this weekend. Friendship, like Materialists they've got on their slate, which like a little different. Eddington is on their slate. They have Highest to Lowest, like Marty Supreme, If I Had Legs I'd Kick You, which came out of Sundance. So there's definitely like, I would say, an excess of horror on this list. But even like, you know, like I saw Bring Her Back and I haven't seen like Materialist yet, but I'm just talking about like kind of like visually, like things feel, it's all like a very similar visual style, if that makes sense.
Well,
like,
it's all, I mean, but that's where the Netflixness of it comes in, because it's all very highly
even if
saturated.
It's like a visual style that I like more than the Netflix style, that doesn't change the fact that it is a house style, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and it's it's high saturation, high contrast, very visually appealing, a sort of an assault on the eyes, like candy, a lot of eye candy. But, you know, let's be honest. I can call it right now. Eddington's going to lose money. Highest to Lowest is going to lose money. Like, these movies are not going to make... these movies are not going to be profitable at the box office.
We'll see. Highest to Lowest is interesting because Denzel is a huge draw, as we've seen historically. But like,
you're right. You're right. Okay. All right. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I guarantee Eddington's not going to make the money. No way. They are a horror company that moonlights as a art company. And their horror is very much in the tradition of sort of Roger Corman, like elevated, innovative horror ideas for a new audience. We just don't want to admit it. And so my hope is that MUBI can, you know, a lot of what this article seemed to be promising is that like, no, this guy is principled. He's going to stick to his principles. He loves film. He just wanted to find In the Mood for Love. And essentially he spent his whole life trying to fill this In the Mood for Love size hole. So like,
aren't we all?
I agree. Yeah. So can he do it? Can he sustain that kind of dedication to the game, to the craft, and stay profitable?
So I want to take this opportunity to sort of segue into, I know you wanted to talk about this, where does this sort of leave Criterion? Because, you know, we talked about this, Neon and MUBI are like the only buyers in Cannes, essentially. And last year, Criterion and Janus Films sold to Indian Paintbrush, which they do basically all the Wes Anderson movies, or the founder, Stephen Rails, sold to him. But what does this sort of signal for Criterion and Janus? And I'll let you kind of start that off because I know you wanted to talk about this specifically.
Well, I do think it's just really interesting because like after like this glowing article, it's got me really excited. Of course, like it's feeding me all the talking points that I just am eating up. And I'm like, but as of right now, I am not a MUBI subscriber because I have always made the decision of, do I subscribe to Criterion or do I subscribe to MUBI for my fancy film tastes? And I've always gone with Criterion. And for the vast majority of people that I know, they go with Criterion if they have to choose between the two. Like they'll hop onto MUBI for like a 1 month deal and then they'll get back off. Criterion always seemed to me to be in a pole position just in terms of brand strength, brand recognition, and association with like the finest films ever made. And in the last couple of years, they started transitioning to becoming a buyer where they were actually like they were doing new releases of new films. Last year, they are the ones who bought Flow at Cannes. They're the ones who bought All We Imagine Is Light. Now, all of a sudden, but here's the thing is that like F.A. Cackrell in this article, he's the guy who coded MUBI from the ground up. Like they do everything in-house and have retained this incredible focus, which has allowed them to succeed in the marketplace, whereas Criterion has to operate as part of like a bigger conglomerate. Obviously, like the Criterion streaming stuff is actually a subsidiary to their disc business. Like they're still a physical media company first and foremost. Yeah. And so with this sale to Stephen Rails, it really seems like those ambitions and probably just like the cash at hand has really been low. I don't think Criterion Janus has bought a single title at Cannes this year.
I don't think so.
And same with Metrograph, which is like a small theater chain / streaming service / publicity company based in New York City. They also acquired the rights to a few films at last year's festival. So it is really interesting. And Criterion was the one thing that was not mentioned within the article at all. And I thought that silence was almost more telling about, I think MUBI's feeling sort of like, we've got this, like we've won the war.
Yeah, well, I think, and I guess we should, I wanted to check this because I think we just said, and I feel like we've said twice, that it's really basically just MUBI and Neon at Cannes, but A24 has also, obviously we talked about like Eddington and Heisen Lows, but like
those were their films that they brought to Cannes. But as far as buyers in the marketplace,
right? I just wanted to make sure we mentioned them. Whatever. But to answer your question, it's interesting because like you're right, like they Flow and All That We Imagine Is Light, but I guess for me personally, like seeing the two of them in my head, I don't know if like, I do think it sort of signals like Criterion is kind of, I don't think they're really going to enter the buying game. And I've always seen them as like, and a very near and dear to my heart, I do not say this disparagingly, but as like a sort of like restoration, physical media, see a cool, important old film that I've never seen before, get a new 4K release of an old film. That is sort of where I see like their bread and butter. And MUBI, I mean, I think from the beginning has always like read to me as like very international. Not that Criterion isn't, but like international in an older kind of sense. I would say Criterion is an international like new release kind of service, if that makes sense.
Totally. It's just kind of crazy that like we've got two streaming services catering to like a truly art house cinema crowd. Mm-hmm. One just got $1 billion valuation and $100 million investment from Sequoia Capital. The other has announced that they have a van that they've turned into the Criterion Closet that they are taking to several cities this year, and you can get your Instagram photograph at their Criterion Closet van. That is so sad as a comparison point. Like,
I do think people,
what is happening?
I don't know if it's like that sad though. Like they still hold the public consciousness, I feel like, in terms of like a cinephile service, and perhaps that'll change. Go ahead.
They do, but like we're talking about two companies competing within a digital space for subscribers. The landscape that boils down to a zero-sum game where you have a winner, a market dominator, and like a market trailer that is usually in a forever losing position. And unless someone comes in and is willing to pump capital into them, like they can't survive. It really, if there was stock available, I'd be selling my Criterion channel subscription stock. I think they can survive as a physical media company, but as far as like a subscription online service, I think that everything that we're seeing is really spelling sort of doom for that as a long-term vehicle for growth, and that potentially the smarter move for Criterion will be to shut down the channel and begin licensing their content to MUBI.
I don't know if I would go that far, but I'm curious. Like, are you going to like switch subscriptions?
I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I mean, I'm not that like that's a vote of confidence. It's just that like everything MUBI is doing is really impressive. Like they are really growing their business and like they're profitable. And when you look at sort of all this activity that's going on their side and compared to Criterion, which has a stronger brand association in the hearts and minds of cinephiles, at least here in the United States, It's shocking to me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I just don't, I'd be interested to see how things progress for Criterion moving forward, because it doesn't, I don't know, they don't seem, and maybe there's like something going on inside that we don't know about, obviously, but like they have, I don't, when's the last time they like up subscription? Like they don't seem that worried, I guess I would say. Like there, nothing seems to be like, it's still like relatively cheap to have that subscription. It's like $10.99 a month or $100 for the whole year, basically. And like, which is like pretty good comparatively like to like a bunch of other streaming services. I don't know, maybe I'm just like being a little naive, but I don't know if I'd like spelled like complete doomsday for them yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean maybe
Yeah.
maybe there's enough cinephiles to support too. I just don't know. I think that the way that these digital marketplaces go is that there's usually one
Yeah.
clear winner, and right now MUBI is running circles around Criterion.
Yeah, I think you're right digitally. I do think their like physical media business is like super strong. Like that still has so much like brand name recognition, I think. Like when you have like the Criterion
as
copy of
strong
something.
as strong as DVD businesses can be in 2025.
Yeah. I have my Nora right here.
Yeah. Oh, sick.
But yeah. Which neon release? I don't know. All right. Let's move on to our next, and we're going to try to move through these fairly quickly. But this next one comes from Indiewire. It was written by Brian Welk. I feel like he's doing a lot of work over there. Shout out to Brian. But it's titled LA Mayor Karen Bass Wants to Cut the Red Tape Required to Get a Movie Made in Hollywood. So I believe this was published like, I want to say soon after we recorded last week, because my boyfriend was like, why don't you guys talk about this? And I was like, it's on the docket, don't worry. So essentially, LA Mayor Karen Bass issued an executive order. You know, we talk about tax incentives a lot on this podcast, but obviously those aren't the only, there are other hoops that filmmakers have to jump through to get things made. And those are what this executive order from the LA Mayor are trying to address. So she issued an executive order that would streamline the application process for filming at city-owned landmarks. So basically like reducing the number of fees and city employees that would be required to be on set for filming. So that would be making it easier to shoot at like iconic locations such as the Central Library, the Port of LA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Also, through this executive order, the city wants to reduce the number of city officials required to be on set to supervise. And they also want to cut all fees to make it more affordable to shoot in LA in general. So no more price gouging. Karen Bass also reiterated her support for Gavin Newsom's desire to more than double the current state tax credit allotment to $750 million to make the state more competitive. And she's essentially just made it a goal of hers to bring back runaway productions to LA. And, as I was reading this, and I figured you might have like a better handle on this, being the filmmaker that you are, but I was sort of curious, like, does Atlanta have like, there's probably some red tape, obviously, but does Atlanta have like the type of red tape that we're talking about here? Because I feel like this isn't the first time I've heard, LA filmmakers sort of complain about the amount of fees they need to pay, kind of the hoops they need to jump through in order to film in that city. So I was curious, like, what is that sort of like here? And then my second kind of question, not to throw too much on you, but obviously this podcast is like ideally for all indie filmmakers, regardless of where you live, where you're from, whatever. Like we want everyone to be able to listen, but we do live in Georgia. And so I'm curious, like, what are the ramifications of something like this for smaller film communities, I guess, outside of LA?
I mean, listen, as far as like a filmmaker's perspective, you're asking the wrong person. I'm in the business. I carry bowl cutters. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm in the business of asking for forgiveness, not permission. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, but I do know for a fact, yes, shooting in LA is logistically harder. All this goes back to the New York in the late 60s, where they created the first film and television office to streamline production, because shooting in New York beforehand, you had to get permits from like 8 different offices, and every time you needed a permit, like the mafia could step in and basically say like, oh, you don't have a permit like for this. And so it was this massively corrupt situation. they founded the very first local film and TV office that was like going to streamline all the permitting process and everything. And that's why we got all these great New York films in the late 60s, early 70s. Midnight Cowboy was one of the very first films to take advantage of this. And it only got better and better from there. That's the reason why any movie that's like set in New York prior to like 1968 wasn't shot in New York. It was shot in a soundstage in LA because it was just like too hard to shoot in New York City. So that model has spread all over the world now. Here in Atlanta, we have a film and television office that is very responsive. We'll set you up with all the permitting stuff you need, any sort of police escorts and street closures and all that sort of good stuff. And they do make it very, very easy. Los Angeles has always taken this for granted. Like the core problem with LA's film problem is that they have taken their filmmakers and their industry for granted for all these years. Mm-hmm. And for most of these years, the technological know-how and the equipment needed was geographically contained within Southern California, and so there was no reason to worry. Well, digital filming techniques have made film easier to move globally than ever before, and the rising costs of shooting film in America has made it disadvantageous to do so. Ultimately, that has led to these problems being still existing in LA, and I'm glad that they are addressing them. But like, come on, let's be real. This is a Band-Aid on a flesh wound. Who cares about shooting at Griffith fucking Observatory when you have to pay the health insurance for 100 employees? That's the core issue here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And it's interesting. Like, obviously, we talked about the tariffs last week, and sort of like, we talked about the kind of what was it called? Like the Hollywood wish list letter that a bunch of his ex sort of sent to Trump. And it feels like a sort of similar situation, like using that sort of presidential crash out, like as a jumping off point to try to like solve problems that have always been there, but maybe too little too late. I don't know.
I don't know. That's a charitable reading of the situation. I call this virtue signaling from a mayor who really can't do that much to help her constituents, but she has to look like she's doing something. So yeah, we'll make it easier to shoot at the Port of LA and at the Griffith Observatory. Hope that works with your script. Like, that's great. I mean, the one thing that like will actually help filmmakers is the price gouging issues. Yeah. If they actually go through it and enforce it, because like one of the things that's horrible about filming in LA is that if anyone catches wind that you are a film production shooting around the block, not only do they up their parking lot charges, they up like their food charges, like everything goes up. But people, like if you're shooting in an apartment complex in LA and someone sees a grip truck pull up, they will turn on their stereo and crank the music as loud as possible and wait for the film production company to go to their apartment and say, can you turn the music down? They're like, yeah, that'll be $2,000. Like that happens in LA all the time. That is like part of the culture there because people are so used to movie makers and people are so used to films having budgets that, they should get a little bit of that. That really doesn't happen anywhere else in the country. Like here in Atlanta, it's just like, oh, there's a movie down the street. I'm so excited.
Right. People still get so excited about it. It's like a novelty.
I better be quiet. There's a movie down the street. You know what I mean? So like, it is a very different sort of cultural situation. So if they can actually affect some of that price gouging, some of those things where the residents of LA try to exploit the industry that like is operating there, I think that that's very good. But as a whole, this is virtue signal nonsense that does nothing to address the systemic issues that make it so expensive to film in America.
It's interesting. I did not realize that the residents of LA were essentially blackmailing. It's kind of funny, but not good. Obviously not good. That's crazy, but just did not realize that was happening. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on. Let's try to move through the rest of these pretty quick. I know you have some thoughts on this next one. So again, is from Indiewire, Brian Welk. Thanks, Brian. Titled Lionsgate lets you buy movie tickets to Ballerina and the TikTok Shop. So essentially, Lionsgate is experimenting with a new ticket buying method. So it's trying to get people to see the John Wick spinoff Ballerina, which I'm seeing in a couple weeks. A little bit early, but not too early. See?
Lucky you.
Basically by selling movie tickets to the film via TikTok. So it's kind of the first example of this sort of thing. They're not like circumnavigating Fandango or anything like that, but I think like it was during the live stream of the Ballerina premiere, which took place on May 22nd in London, so a few days ago. Viewers of that live stream were able to directly like visit the TikTok shop, buy a package of merch tied to the film, and get a physical ticket with like a Fandango movie code to go see the movie. No idea if this will work, but okay.
Yeah, how many units do you think they sold?
I have 100? No idea.
50?
I'm sort of like, who's watching the ballerina live stream besides like influencers that perhaps were paid to cover the film?
You know what? All I can really say is I'm glad Lionsgate is doing something, because oh my God. Sammie, this was a sort of eye-opening moment. I know, like, I'll be honest, like, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about Lionsgate, but like, last year was such a terrible year for them. They are sort of teetering on the brink of irrelevance. And I just looking at their current and upcoming slate, it just the illusions all fled from my eyes. This is like a C level. This is like a joke of a studio that has been hiding behind big budget IP for their entire lifespan, and the mask is off. You know what I mean? Like they got by because of the Hunger Games, which I know they're rebooting.
They already have rebooted, but yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, Hunger Games, Twilight, Insurgent, or whatever those Resurgent, whatever.
Oh, those are so bad. I read all those books. They're really bad. Divergent.
So yeah, but Divergent. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, we've got, but it's a studio that is like based on sort of trash YA IP that has had this gloss, because their movies made money. They had this gloss of legitimacy, but like this is a joke of a studio. This is like the worst of Roger Corman. This is like the worst of AIP from back in the day. Like, this is a terrible, terrible studio that is making bad movies.
I want to push back on not the trash YA comment, although I would argue the Hunger Games isn't really trash. But I do think like it is like smart to like kind of capitalize on those things, and like regardless of like how you think those movies are, I wouldn't call that like a bad business move. You know what I mean? Well, like I saw all the Twilight movies. Like I was a huge Twilight head. I loved the Hunger Games. Like, you know what I mean? It's just I'm not sure if the John Wick spinoff will do well. I enjoy Ana de Armas. I am going to see it. With an open mind, but we'll see.
There's no way this works. Come on, there is no way this works. How many times do they have to take like a successful action product with a male protagonist, put a woman in it, and it succeeds? It never works.
And it's also, I don't know if it'll. And again, I'm happy to be proven wrong. I'm excited to go see it. This is sort of off topic. I'm just curious how. I don't know if this will like lend itself to Ana de Armas's talents. Like, I think this is probably based off the one like 10-minute section in the new James Bond movie, which I will say is the best section of that not very good movie. But I think the success of that lends on her ability to be charming. And I wouldn't call like John Wick a very charming action series. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it'll really like lend to her talents very well.
Yeah, I think this is a bad sign. And like, she seemed to be like with her whole like Marilyn Monroe movie was that like is
not her fault as a full movie.
Yeah, but she was like she was hoping for like awards buzz with that movie. I know. Like, she was going for
I
like
think she got a Golden Globe nom if I'm not mistaken. But yes, I know.
But like, so to see this sort of like turn, because it's almost like she dabbled with that. It went so badly that it's like, nah, let me go
like a torturous experience.
Let me cash out with some trash. But I think I think it's looking really bad for the future for the Ana de Armas business. But like, Ballerina is going to be terrible. We all know it. It's not going to do well. And they're certainly not going to make up their financial gap with Hurry Up Tomorrow and Shadow Force, their other movies that are either currently out or about to come out. I mean, it's just like it's just joke after joke after joke from Lionsgate.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. John Wick like is popular. I am a little nervous about at least like the monetary sort of ability of this movie to kind of be successful. But again, I am excited to see it. I hope everything does well.
I don't think it's going to be artistically successful. So monetary.
It might be trash action
successful.
I can live with that, but we'll see.
The last thing is I have a personal beef with Lionsgate right now because they own. Yeah. Well, I mean, on top of their movies just being garbage across the board, they own the American theatrical rights to one of the greatest action movies ever made, Battle Royale, the original Battle Royale. They have the theatrical rights because they own the rights to Hunger Games. And as we all know, Hunger Games is a blatant ripoff of Battle Royale. They refuse to release the theatrical rights of Battle Royale. I just tried to screen it last month. Before I screened Withnell and I, we originally put in a request to Lionsgate for Battle Royale. They did not respond. I think they are trying to silence Battle Royale from the American marketplace because they know that Hunger Games is a Battle Royale ripoff. And this is just one more straw on the camel's back against Lionsgate. Release Battle Royale, make better movies, get your shit together, Lionsgate.
See, this is where, and I'm sure that the Hunger Games is very similar to Battle Royale, but I am so within that age group. Like, I fucking ride for the Hunger Games. Like, I have the new book sitting right there. I'm about to finish another book and start it like tomorrow. I liked Of Songbirds and Snakes. I'm a Hunger Games stan, Aaron. Sorry.
Yeah.
You look so mad right now.
Yeah, I mean, I just. Have you seen Kenji Fukasaku's Battle Royale? Because
I have not. And again, I'm sure it's great. But I'm sort of like, don't you think, I don't know, if I were like, I don't know. I would not be worried about the audience for Hunger Games disappearing because we put out Battle Royale. Yeah. No offense. They're very different.
Yeah, no, it's not going to happen. But it certainly happened to me last month, and I am still pissed about it.
Okay. All right. Well, speaking of the children do love the Hunger Games, I'm told. Let's talk to the kids. So the LA kids, I assume these kids are from LA. I'm actually not sure, but I would assume they are.
They have to be.
So Matt Belloni for Puck, this is the second time he's done this, but he basically did like a Hollywood report card according to a bunch of high school kids. So talks with a group of teens about what movies they like, what stars they care about, etc. I figured we could jump into this by talking about some of our takeaways. I'm happy to start if you want.
Go for it.
All right. So some big takeaways. The boys love Tom Cruise. The gals not so much, which it kind of tracks, I guess. But one of my favorite quotes from one of these teens was about Tom Cruise. Quote, "He's just kind of reheating nachos," unquote, which is kind of like right on the nose. They're just like bigger, meatier nachos every time as he like ups the stunt game, But like, I take her point. Live action remakes are lazy. Speaking of Lilo and Stitch, we got kind of that rundown from the teams. I don't think that Lilo and Stitch is necessarily targeting Gen Z. It's more like the millennial nostalgia and their young children, as you said. But I thought that was sort of interesting. The kids like Pixar, it seems. The teens are sort of like into Pixar. I mean, Matt Belloni, it was right after they talked about kind of being like, oh, like sequels are lazy. This is lazy. And then they immediately kind of were like, oh, the new Pixar movie looks cute. And I think one of them said something like, Pixar isn't like doing the sequel thing. And Matt Belloni goes, well, Inside Out 2 just came out. And they immediately get on the defensive. Like they're kind of like, well, that's different.
No,
like,
but that's good.
Different.
Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah. Totally.
Which I thought was pretty funny. And then the other thing,
Toy Story 7's around the corner. Like, oh, no, but...
I thought that was pretty funny. And then this is the part that really made me laugh is they talked about, and Puck sort of published this a while ago. It's sort of like the National Research Group's latest study on the actors who will put you in a movie theater seat. So, and they go through like actors in general, and then they go through the list of where they just asked high school kids. And I would like you to say who made the top of that list, that official list. Who is the movie star? List? According to that list, that the kids, the teenagers, Gen Z, love the most.
According to this list, the biggest draw for Gen Z is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson?
Insanity.
What?
And that's what the kids said. They really like they solidify my belief that this is absolute. I don't know how this is possible, but like it's funny because Matt Belloni asked them like, can you guess who Gen Z named as the number one star? And they're all like, oh, Zendaya, Timothée Chalamet, Tom Holland, Pedro Pascal, Austin Butler, Glenn Powell, like even older guys like Leo, Tom Cruise, Ben Affleck. And when he says it's The Rock, they're all like, absolutely not.
Yeah, they're all like, I haven't seen a Rock
way.
movie since Jungle Cruise. Like, what are we doing?
They're like,
here?
This is not accurate whatsoever.
Yeah,
I don't know what these metrics are.
Are you talking to?
But those are some of my big ones. I thought all in all, this interview was pretty funny. Like, teenagers can be funny, but it was a good one. What did you sort of take away from this?
Oh, yeah, totally. It was very, very cute. You highlight. I mean, I think the biggest thing was sort of like their overall just so blasé. I mean, not actually so blasé. Some of them talked about, I'm talking about superhero movies. They were generally blasé towards superhero movies.
Yeah.
They found Marvel confusing. A few of them were like, oh, I still go see every Marvel movie with my dad.
And a couple people seemed to be like Thunderbolts sort of reinvigorated their interest a bit. But
you could tell that it was a little muted. One thing they were all definitely united on was that new Superman, not exciting.
Bad.
New Superman seems lame as fuck. Which is kind of interesting because this whole time we've been characterizing, the entire industry has been characterizing James Gunn's Superman as sort of like the make or break time for Warner Brothers Discovery. Meanwhile, Warner Brothers Discovery has just been crushing it movie after movie. I mean, they are just doing a Minecraft, Sinners, Final Destination, just like hit.
Right.
And Superman is just looking like a
the kids are not
bigger
excited
dud as we get closer to the Superman release. So that was interesting. There were some really funny quotes in here. Okay, Belloni asked a question. What do you think about the movies you see on Netflix versus those you see in theaters? And one young woman said, the acting is just not that good. It's like, how did they make this? What was it? You are so not invited to my bat mitzvah? How is this a movie?
Oh, that's so funny. I really laughed at that one because she really took a shot at me because, like, you're not invited to my bat mitzvah. One thing about me is I'm a sucker for any movie that is remotely okay about like young female friendship. I just like start crying. Like I think I'm at that age. So that felt like a real shot at me. And I was like, thanks, gal. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Also another great quote, and this is just following up on our Lionsgate conversation. Belloni says, well, what about Ballerina? That's the John Wick spinoff with Ana de Armas. It's coming out in 2 weeks. All at once. What is that? Never heard of it. What?
Yeah. Which I'm like, they weren't obviously on the TikTok live.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, overall, it was a very wonderful article. These kids were very film literate. Like I think the average kid doesn't even give a shit about movies. Like they are so locked into YouTube and TikTok. So these kids were like clearly invested in what was going on in the theater, and ultimately, like they came down to what are the two things that puts your butt in a seat at the movie theater: action and horror.
Yeah,
action and horror.
That was true. And I also thought, kind of speaking of funny quotes, the sort of kicker on this article is very funny to me. They're sort of talking about the power of different movie stars. And that's sort of, I'm always interested in that because, it's like, oh, the movie star is dead, like, et cetera, et cetera. Who are the new movie stars, blah, blah, blah. And they kind of called out Margot Robbie, which I thought was really interesting. They talked really positively about Zendaya or Timothée Chalamet. Like, you'll watch a movie just because they're in it. That's how, these Gen Z kids feel. And they sort of talked about Barbie, and I believe her name is Elise, had a sort of pretty interesting kind of call on Margot Robbie. It was like, well, you're watching Barbie because it's Barbie. You're not watching it for Margot Robbie. And then she ended it with, I feel like the majority of Gen Z people watching A Complete Unknown are not going because it's Bob Dylan. They're going because Timothée Chalamet is playing Bob Dylan, which I think solidifies, like, my feeling at least, that he is sort of taking that mantle. And then it ended with a very funny line from one of the boys that said, I went because of Bob Dylan, which I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah. I thought this was very interesting too. And in many ways, it also ties back, it kind of puts a nice bow on our entire conversation today and all the topics we've covered. Because at its core, MUBI is if MUBI really is trying to replace Miramax, the dirty little secret about Miramax that nobody likes to think about is that, yes, Miramax rose to prominence on the backs of its young, talented, hot stars, but it catered to an older, more sophisticated audience that was just around more in the 90s. That, they had grown up on the new Hollywood of the 70s, and now we're looking for that sort of artistic merit.
Yeah.
That audience is fewer and far between, not to mention that audience is now getting into their 60s and 70s, and they probably can't even find MUBI on the Apple Store. You know what I mean? So how is MUBI going to continue that trajectory and cater to this audience? And furthermore, how are we bringing up our audiences into cinema culture and to appreciating interesting stories when the offerings on the whole are so bad, and they're ultimately the only thing that's getting them to go to the theater is action and horror. Yeah. And I think it's just it's an existential threat for the future of sort of artistic filmmaking.
Well, love to end this pod on a downbeat. But that's all we got today. That was fun. What a fun Memorial Day episode.
Wonderful work. Yes, this has been great. Do you have any writing coming up that you would like to mention that people need to go check out?
Let me think. My Mission Impossible review is out if you want to read that right now. Again, I said sort of mixed, but I'm a little bit of a sucker for that franchise, so it kind of won me over in the end. And then I'll have a review on Bring Her Back, the new horror movie coming out this Friday, so look out for that. And I'll also have a review on Jane Austen Wrecked My Life, which I thought, if you like Jane Austen, is a lovely little quirky romantic comedy. So it's already out, but my review will be out this Friday, so look out for that.
Nice. Very, very cool. If you are in the greater New York area, if you're listening in NYC, Withdrawal will be making its New York premiere on Friday, June 6th at the Art of Brooklyn Film Festival. We will be playing at the Stewart Cinema in Greenpoint, Brooklyn on Friday, June 6th at 7 p.m. Tickets will be available. You can check out the link in my bio on Instagram. You can get tickets through there. I'll be there doing a Q&A afterward. It's going to be really, really fun. It's a really, really cool theater, small little intimate house out in Brooklyn. So yeah, I'm so excited. And if you're in New York, come through. I'd love to see you. Other than that, I have nothing else. This has been lovely, Sammie. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, rate, and review. Hit us with the 5 stars. Leave a little comment. Those kind of things really go a long way to help us out, get us discovered more. If you would like to email us, you can send us an email, crashzoompod@gmail.com. You can follow us, Crash Zoom Podcast, on Instagram and TikTok. And otherwise, that's all I got. Until next week, Sammie, I will talk to you.
I'll see ya.